In a marble workshop loading area, large granite slabs are being loaded onto a truck. Everything seems routine. The heavy slab stands upright as the team tries to position it. However, even if these slabs appear stable from the outside, their balance is extremely sensitive. Suddenly, the slab begins to slide. Within seconds, it tips over sideways with its full weight. The situation unfolds so fast, there is almost no time to escape. These stone slabs can weigh several tons, and even the slightest imbalance can cause uncontrolled movement. That's why such operations must always be carried out with proper lifting equipment, and the potential fall zone must be completely cleared. During a training flight, Naval Academy students are performing parachute jumps. Everything is progressing as planned. Students jump one by one and begin their descent. But for one of them, things take a different turn. After the jump, the parachute does not deploy as expected. As soon as the teams notice the situation, they initiate emergency procedures. But time moves incredibly fast. Despite the intervention, the situation cannot be brought under control. In such training scenarios, everything depends on the system, and even the smallest malfunction can completely change the outcome. That's why parachute systems must be checked multiple times before the jump, and emergency procedures must be followed, without exception. On a production line, a heavy press machine continues operating. Everything seems normal. A worker gets closer than necessary to the machine's operating area. At that moment, the press activates. The heavy mechanism descends rapidly, and the worker is caught right in the danger zone. Everything happens within seconds. In such machines, distance is the most critical safety barrier. When protective systems and safe working zones are violated, the machine does not stop, and the result occurs instantly. In a passageway in Istanbul, a young worker is walking while focused on his phone. Everything seems normal. At the same time, a loading grate on the ground has been left open. Completely distracted by the phone, he fails to notice it. And, in an instant, the ground disappears beneath him. The young worker falls directly to the lower floor. Luckily, he lands on boxes below and manages to get up without serious injury. Everything happens in seconds. This incident shows how quickly distraction can turn into a serious risk, even in the simplest moment. In a compactor area, a driver prepares to open the rear door of a truck. Everything seems routine. The moment he releases the latch, the heavy panel suddenly comes free, and instantly, it swings outward with full force. The movement is so fast that reacting becomes almost impossible. In such doors, built-up pressure or load inside can create an uncontrolled force when opened. That's why these areas are always considered strike zones. Standing in front of this zone means placing yourself directly in harm's way. 6. In an area where stacked pipes are stored, a heavy lifting operation is underway. Everything appears to be under control. However, the ground is not stable. Pipe stacks are sensitive even to small movements. As the load shifts, the balance begins to change. In such environments, even the slightest movement can affect the entire system. That's why approaching the load's movement path in these areas directly increases the risk. Maintaining a wide safety zone is the most critical protection in situations like this. In a rural area, there is a narrow suspension bridge connecting two settlements, originally designed only for pedestrians and light vehicles. However, despite the warnings, a driver decides to cross the bridge with a truck. But as the vehicle reaches the middle of the bridge, the cables begin to strain. The wooden deck cannot handle the load. Within seconds, the structure starts to collapse. The center of the bridge breaks. A worker is standing right next to a heavy machine that is still operating. Everything seems normal. However, the machine is still in motion. And suddenly, his arm gets caught in a moving part. Because the system operates so quickly, his arm is pulled into the mechanism instantly. Everything happens within seconds. In such machines, the greatest risk is intervening while they are running. Any action performed without stopping the machine removes all control. That's why the system must be completely shut down, and no approach should be made without cutting the power. In a narrow and crowded warehouse aisle, forklifts move quickly between the racks. The environment is constantly busy. A forklift approaches a corner to make a sharp turn. At the same time, a worker is standing directly in its path. There is no physical separation between them. As the forklift turns the corner, the load it carries swings outward in a wide arc, and in an instant, the worker is pinned between the load and the forklift. Everything happens within seconds. In such areas, the greatest risk is humans and machines sharing the same path. Without separate walkways and clearly defined safety zones, even the simplest maneuver can turn into a loss of control. An incident that begins inside an apartment quickly gets out of control within seconds. A 65-year-old man tries to escape down the stairs. However, instead of using the stairs normally, he grabs onto a metal railing in the stairwell and attempts to descend quickly. At first, it seems manageable, but this action is highly risky. A few seconds later, he loses his grip, and suddenly, he falls downward. Everything happens in a very short time. Trying to descend from a height in an uncontrolled manner can cause a complete loss of balance, even with a small mistake.